Hi everyone, my name is Kennedy, and for my research project this semester, my initial topic was to explain how Korean Buddhism was so different compared to other forms of Mahayana Buddhism. So, quickly going into it, I did my research on Korean Buddhism, of course, Chinese Buddhism, and Japanese Buddhism, and I quickly came to the conclusion that Korean Buddhism just didn't sound like Buddhism compared to the others in what we've been learning in class. So the more I started to look into it, I came to the conclusion that Korean Buddhism wasn't actually Buddhism, but instead it was like a syncretic blend between what we know as Buddhism along with native shamanism. So for anyone who doesn't know what shamanism in Korea was a foundational religion for them, and it's carried on through their history. It's gone in waves where it sometimes becomes less popular, and they've people who believe in shamanism were actually oppressed, and then it comes back, but it's deeply embedded now into their cultures after, hundreds and hundreds of years of existence. So shamanism in itself is a polytheistic religion where believers worship these multiple deities that they believe affect human life in the universe and what happens, which is obviously very, very different than Buddhism. So people would go to a shaman to connect to these deities. They believe that shamans during rituals actually become the deities, and they go into their bodies and their soul. So it's very common for shamans to be able to do unhuman-like feats like contort their body and walk on nails and do things that a typical human wouldn't be able to do in terms of pain. And during these ceremonies, they'll do sacrifices through food or animals. They do a lot of dancing and chanting and herbal remedies, a lot of things having to do with nature and plants. But it is very different than Buddhism. They do have some commonalities in terms of healing. While shamanism does focus mostly on physical healing, they do pay respects to healing the mind and the soul, and they also believe in meditation. So throughout my research, I found three major contradictions between Korean Buddhism and what we've learned to be Buddhism. And the first one was a deity that's presented all throughout Korean Buddhist temples called Shanshin. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it's also known as the mountain god. And the mountain god is a deity actually in native shamanism that has been inherited into Korean Buddhist cultures, where they now have altars and murals dedicated to this deity within Buddhist temples, where people will go and pay tribute to this deity instead of going to a temple to achieve enlightenment or reach nirvana. In Korea, it's actually very common for people to go to Buddhist temples to be physically healed rather than, get this mental healing, which was very different than other forms of Mahayana Buddhism. Another contradiction I found was the participation in exorcism rituals. Obviously, exorcisms, I feel like, are known through Christianity, but they're also done in shamanism in Korea. And for people who identify as Buddhist, they do sometimes participate in exorcism rituals that are nearly identical to the rituals performed in shamanism. They consist of dancing and chanting and music playing, and towards the end, people throw red beans at this altar with the possessed individual, per se, to hopefully release their soul and heal them. And just this action being this ceremony being done by Buddhists is very odd for given what we know about Buddhism. And the last major contradiction I found between the Buddhism we've learned about in Korean Buddhism is animal sacrifice. So as we all know, Buddhists have this no harm doctrine. Oftentimes they're vegetarians or vegans, and they don't believe in harming other living things. But it's not uncommon for people who believe in Korean shamanism as well as Buddhism to participate in these animal sacrificial rituals. And during these rituals, it's pretty intense. I've read some articles saying that these people actually, bite into dead animal carcasses. They'll smell them and even dig themselves into the bodies of, dead pigs and stuff to try to bring people peaceful deaths or all of these other things. So those were just a couple distinctions I found, or contradictions between what I thought was Buddhism and what Korean Buddhism really is that makes it simply just not Buddhism. I think being able to participate in these animal sacrifices and these exorcism rituals and praying to multiple gods is just too different and just antithetical compared to what we know as Buddhism. And the last thing I wanted to touch on was how, Korean Buddhism got to this point in time. So basically, when monks first reached the Korean peninsula, shamanism was the people of Korea were completely indebted to shamanism. They were very strong believers. They went to them for healers, for advice, for quite literally any issues they had in their lives. And there was a king, and his daughter, the princess, was sick, and no shaman in the village could physically cure her. And the monks presented themselves as healers, and they were like, they said that they could physically heal the princess. And when it came down to it, they somehow did physically heal the princess. And from there, they kind of had this idea, everyone looked at them as healers, and they had to adhere to that just to be accepted and have Buddhism accepted in this new environment, which is where that fusion with shamanism instantly, came right from the beginning. And it's just built and built and built into this new almost religion that's neither shamanism or Buddhism, but more of a fusion. I think that's all. That's a basic summary of my paper, but yeah, thank you guys.